Hey everybody, what's up? It's Booksy. Today is Monday, November 13th. This is going to be an outlook for the week. I'm going to talk briefly about last week, price action. I know that a lot of folks didn't watch that video. It got about half as many views as normal, but that makes sense because it was more of an educational video. It was long form. In that video, I did talk about the setup for the bottom range here and what might happen. We didn't end up getting the auto reaction on Friday, so did you miss much? No. I mean, if you wanted to learn how I've kind of like set it up, I think it's a good video to kind of learn how I think about things. If that matters to you, if you just wanted the information, you didn't get it. But the information was pretty simple, which is that we needed to cross these early creeks. We crossed two of them on Friday, but neither resulted in any kind of a really major buy-in. In fact, we have very, very low volume all day Friday on this push-up. Presents itself more like an LSPY, which is a last point of supply, and then it also presents itself as a bear flag. Okay, now we could go through and we could look at those targets, but the bottom line is we didn't get an auto reaction on Friday. And so as a result, that means that you're not really at the bottom yet, right? An auto reaction happens when the trend reverses and you go back up to test that first major points of support up here. And you're basically not getting that until you get that real definitive breakout. Okay, and we'll look at the small term here in a minute, but I want to zoom out and just kind of look at the big picture. So 30-minute tends to be a pretty good bridge between lower time frames and higher time frames. Everything below 30 minutes right now is still oversold and a bit divergent. Everything above 30 minutes on an hour and up, not quite as much. An hour is oversold. You get to 2 hours and 4 hours. It's not quite there yet. It's almost there. But in any case, we didn't get, when we dropped down here, we didn't get any kind of a hook. Normally on the cat ear kind of section, you get some kind of a reaction back up to test the major trend. There wasn't one. So this is something I'm going to keep on my chart because at this point, if and when this does reverse, right, this is going to be a pretty major indicator of price, more than likely. Okay, and the longer it takes, obviously, the farther up it might go. But I think because we didn't get that hook, it's kind of strange. It probably was just to be a more definitive bull trap. There was no exit for the bulls here. If you held on to, everything on Thursday, it burns you again, right? Because they didn't let the bulls out. So anybody that got into call options up here hoping for like 13, well, it didn't work out, right? Or even just a small reaction, which was my case. I was looking at it coming up to 1050. Even that was kind of withheld. So there was a lot that there's a lot to be considered about that. But point is that after we drop down here, we have this early support that we get right at 8, and the rest of the week ends up being kind of an effort to bleed us back down through that same 8, and that 8 is the high liquidity. So here we have a bit of an issue, right, which is that we're now below, we've rejected right along that high liquidity point around 8. We're now below that and we're coming down. There's always two sides to every coin, two sides to every pancake, right? So it's not all bad. Like I said, 30 minutes and below, there is some mild divergence. We're still oversold. 1 hour is oversold, but when you get up to higher time frames, if we jump up to like 4 hour, for example, aside from us being like really far away from, this looks like a super mechanical, just straight down drop, right? Aside for us being really far away from the moving average, which makes it look really overextended, and I think it is to some degree, we're not quite oversold yet. We're like right on the line. So it's at this point where you might start seeing it kind of turn, but definitely these higher time frames, you're just not really in a position ready to see that major pivot. You're getting there. It's like pretty close. So outside of where this was at 8, there's not really anything below us. 760, that could provide a support kind of right where we're at right now. But that's sort of the last major support level until you get down to like 740. And you can see why. If you look at the previous range that we traveled through here, this is 60 days. They're being, undone in 7 days. this is pretty much like that last support before you get down to really what the bottom was, which is around 740, and then you have the low at 7. And so, those are basically your levels right now. There's not much else that could catch you. When we look at whether or not this will pivot, you can see here that the setup coming into this bottom looks pretty similar. It looks like it was ripe for an automatic reaction, perhaps, going into Friday. And this is what happens right here. But the problem is that we don't hold it, right? It rejects and it breaks down again, and then you sort of zoom in, you can see, oh, well, crud, that kind of just looks like a distribution. Well, it is. And I think that's the problem with any kind of analysis, is that it can go your way, and you can see something that looks like it's going to work out, but it ended up not being the case, right? Especially when you saw what happened on Friday, it didn't look great. So, unfortunately, we didn't do that setup on Friday. Are the markers still valid? Yeah. I mean, you can see here that we did jump over a couple creeks. This one's pretty minor. This was just a minor downtrend. And honestly, I thought the reaction from this would be a little bit bigger. This is where it starts kind of falling apart. You can kind of tell it's not going to make it the strong advances that an auto reaction usually does. And then if you look at the bigger picture here, we've got another major trend that is coming down here. We did jump over this creek. We have not tested it yet. We're kind of coming to it. To be frank, you can see that M right there, that jump across, that sine wave. Looks like it was an effort to try to get across that trend. And this one comes from November 8th through the top at November 9th here in like midday. Not the first top, but the second one. And you can see like, oh, well, if we're kind of coasting down, we're not quite there yet, right? We haven't really tested it. Does it have to get to it? I don't know. Those are questions that are really definitive. It doesn't really necessarily have to get to it. Would it make sense? Yeah, and I think given where we are and that we're still being sold, it's quite crazy, right? So I think it's likely that you could still see this come down quite a ways. Now, in the event that it reverses, you need to see a change of character, right? So we need to see something like a higher low. A reaction here would be good, and then a higher low would be good. Ultimately, I'm watching this particular trend. You might call it a creek. I don't know. It could be, but I'm just kind of watching it as if it's a trend. And this is from the two peaks on Thursday. And so those are the ones that I think you got to cross. Well, one of them we already have, right? So I'll delete that one. One of them you've got maybe a back test on. The other one you'd have to jump over and find support. And then, unfortunately, like I said, sort of like the big picture here is not good. It needs to come back above this particular trend. And if we don't see that, my thought is that you could end up with a really low chop and then maybe a reaction to the upside. But if you see it come back up here and reject at like 810, that's no bueno, right? I think you're more likely going to see, if it chops here, that it distributes. I don't think you want to see a heavy amount of chop. I think you want to see it kind of push up, find support, and then push up again. Okay? And in the event that it does chop, I'm just going to call it for what I think it is, which is it's possibly just a giant S-curve, right? If you see this kind of chop underneath here, I don't see why at that point you don't have a big S-curve that could then come back down pretty low. And we talked about 6. We talked about 650. I'm optimistic that we wouldn't go all the way down to 6, but I don't think that's out of the question. And I think that if this is an S-curve and it does not have an auto reaction and we don't see that kind of sideways chop back up into the mid-8s and 9s, then I don't see why we don't go down. I mean, there's really no support down here. So if the goal is to get us down to low liquidity, then you can go ahead and just take it down. I mean, if you can manage to hook here and have that strong reaction back down and continue the sell-off, you're going to, in my opinion. Because at this point, again, I don't really see why you wouldn't. Like, there's just nothing really to me that... I know some people are going to be like, well, why can't you just double bottom? Why can't you just find another support? I'm not saying it's out of the question. I just think that in terms of like the overall big picture here, the fact that we came all the way back down into this range, right, and we skipped over that kind of middle liquidity already, to me indicates that there's still this strong desire to kind of come down to the low liquidity and then probably below it in some kind of a spring action, hopefully. So all of that being said, if we get an auto reaction today, my expectation is that we may see this come back up to near $9, probably at highest around $9.10. I don't know if it's going to break this kind of outermost creek just yet. I think an auto reaction at this point, again, if it's strong and it manages to continue up here, I think an auto reaction at this point could come quite high. You could end up above it like this in a bigger auto reaction. But really the range to me is kind of this area right where I've got it highlighted. So I don't foresee it coming way past that right now. I think it's likely you come up to near 910. Again, is it possible it goes higher? Sure. But at least for now, I don't think it's necessary. And then I think basically your auto reaction is finished, and then you form out a range, and you're probably going to try to trade high here. Using this as a kind of a baseboard, right? This high liquidity. So all of that has to be kind of mitigated, right? Like you can't just say like, well, it's got to happen. Even if I think it's a strong possibility, what is the confirmation? Well, again, I told you, and I'm trying to be kind of critical here of even my own, work, because you can look at stuff like this and assume that this is going to happen, but that's just an estimation. There's no confirmation yet. The confirmation here would be coming back above, going for that gap fill that we made this morning, but ultimately it has to hold that breakout. So no matter what happens, you'd be waiting for a higher low, you'd be waiting for that push up, you'd be waiting for that pullback. All of that stuff has to happen, and then ultimately you need to come back above like 810 and find support. I don't feel like this is a strong buy at all if you don't come back above here, because even if you did come back up, it's entirely possible that this rejects. This could come up like high even and then reject again, because this could just be a way of kind of redistributing in an upthrust. That's not enough, right? Like you can't just have any of these levels is not enough at this point. So I really think that your main support here has to be around 812. And I think if you buy there and then you continue to push up above, let's say like 825, that would be probably the place that you'd have more or less like a stronger confirmation of a continuation right there. So for me, in terms of being like bullish, that's what I'd be waiting for today. And in terms of being bearish, if I saw this reject here, or if I saw it reject here or reject here, I mean, there's so many places that it could reject. I'm going to kind of presume that it's still bearish. I don't think that, again, with the lower time frames being really oversold, I don't think it's as likely that there's just straight down continuation, which is why on Friday I said, well, I kind of feel like we need that auto reaction in a range, and it looks to me like this is the start of a range. But I always have to say this because this has happened to us before. In the middle of the range, or in the middle of a downtrend, a lot of times we get this kind of ranging function where you get like a top and then a bottom, and it really is just kind of that M cross down, and this is the danger of kind of like assuming everything's going to be bullish. When you go to the upside, right, and we were just talking about this and saying that basically, I always forget where it is, this is kind of what that video was about on Friday. When you're going up, you're doing those jumps over creeks, right? The same thing happens when you go down, When you're going down, you also form jumps, right? And so it's not a stretch at all to say that this kind of a reaction is totally possible, right? You can see why. So in order to really prove that this is bullish, it has to come back up here. It has to find support. It has to then have continuation. Does that give you as a definitive of a trade, maybe as you'd like, if you're going to buy in at the bottom here? No, I mean, it doesn't. It's cheaper to buy right now, but the thing is you have no guarantee. This totally could just react back down and just continue the downtrend, and it potentially then you're just really stuck, right? So if you're going to play anything to the upside today, this morning, me personally, I can't give you financial advice, but me personally, I would be setting, I'd let it run and see if it runs, but then I would be setting stops, because I think that you're going to have a possible major pivot, and you don't want to be caught off guard there, because it could be pretty bad. So in summary, just finish it up. If we see an auto reaction today, and I think maybe up to about 910 or so, could come a little bit higher, but maybe into tomorrow. That's what we see. You can see that liquidity shelf right here sitting around 920. That's where I think that auto reaction roughly is going to go to. I think the main supply that started dumping here was around 875. So I'm feeling like right now, like that's probably we're going to start encountering a whole bunch of sellers if we do come back up. If we do not come back up, then I'm looking at 740 right now as a possible place to pivot. That kind of places us very, very low, and I don't know what that means for any kind of reaction up. It could end up just being like double up thrust or something like crazy like this, right? I mean, because if it's really violent like that and it comes really far down and then reverses really hard, I don't think they're going to form out a huge range that's basically the exact same range we've already traded. I think it's more likely that you're going to see a strong reaction to the upside, and then potentially just come right back down. That seems more likely to me, as opposed to what I was talking about on Friday, which is that sideways week or two long action of kind of building out a more natural range right here, that does more of like the standard stuff that we would expect in a range, and possibly even, at the end breaking to the upside. Those are things that are more normal, right, when you have that auto reaction. But if you have that slide down first and there's a really strong reaction, I don't think it's impossible that this catches and goes back up. Definitely don't think that's out of the question, but typically that's not what we see. Typically we see it as a kind of continuation of downside, which would involve like those multiple kind of like up thrusts that then fizzle out, right? So those are things that I'd be watching out for, with the potential turnaround, but also just knowing that, hey, if it keeps sliding today, there's not a lot of support until like 740 and then down lower at 7. So reaction might be good, but the end result might not be great. So we're going to kind of watch. If I'm a bull right now, I'd prefer to see the early auto reaction and to see it kind of form a range here. But it almost, in some ways, it almost doesn't matter. And this is what I said on Friday, and I'm not going to change my mind just because of, the weekend. It is what it is. Until you see a range form, you don't have necessarily a strong idea of what's coming next. And a lot of people are going to look at, their AI bots or whatever, the CoinDex thing or whatever it is, and say, well, it said we're going back up to 13 or this or that. Yeah, it might. But to get there, you have to have that reversal, right? We haven't even gotten that yet. And to get there, you have to have that kind of reaccumulation and that breakout. And we haven't gotten there yet. And I think the same thing applies for downside. We're really oversold on some of the time frames. Yeah, it might go down. It might end up going down to 6 in the end. But usually you're going to have that pullback and that, redistribution if it's going to continue. So for bear or bull case, I still think that what's most likely here this week is probably this pocket between 8 and 9. And beyond that, I guess I'm just wrong, because I don't know what else to expect this week based on where the indicators are, based on like how we have reacted thus far. Bleeding straight down in a giant S curve, not out of the question. It's just unusual, especially given everything else that we're seeing right now, like what's going on. AMC can remain pretty oversold for a long time on lower time frames, and to some degree on higher time frames, but it's typically like not, right? Like it doesn't, you can see most of the time there's a strong reaction when we get down there. So we're basically right there. So it's hard for me to imagine this continuing down indefinitely. in a straight line to 6. But I guess we'll find out, you know. I know that there's other people that are going to be talking a lot about dilution and other things like that. I'm not going to get into that right now. Kind of talked about it in the Discord group a bit and you know, had a conversation. But I don't think that, well, I mean, it does affect TA. I wasn't about to say, I don't think it really affects that much. It does. It affects things. It's just hard to sort of predict, you know, based on one element of news or one element of this or that. We know that from a technical standpoint, we know what needs to happen to reverse or to drop. So I think that's probably the best way to trade it right now, in my opinion, you know, looking at the chart. So anyways, that's all I got for you. Hope you guys have a good one. We'll talk to you later.